Shirley Jackson is one of those authors who, for me, can capture a specific image better than anyone else. She's capable of putting down the abstract and impossible depression of being neglected and forgotten unlike any other author, the same way Stephen King can craft small-town American white trash like no other. And perhaps even more than The Haunting of Hill House, Jackson puts this feeling to paper with We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which was her final novel and was published in 1962. I was having a terrible weekend and I devoured this because in its world I felt understood, and the fact she died just a few years after its publication really colors the already dreary pages. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. If you haven't read it, then I suggest you do, because I'm going to spoil all of it right now in its entirety. We follow the Blackwood family, a once wealthy part of their village who are now excluded in that odd, socially acceptable way that rural towns exclude people. Mary Catherine Blackwood, or Mary Cat, is one of the few remaining of the family who lives with her cat Jonas, her sister Constance, and their uncle Julian, who is in his last days. Also, the cat doesn't die, so thank you, Shirley Jackson. The secret isn't kept for long that the reason for their expulsion from high society was a dinner that took place 6 years ago, in which Constance, who grows and tends her own garden and prepares the family's meals most of the time, poisoned her family with arsenic. Uncle Julian was the only survivor, aside from Mary Cat and Catherine, who were not present and did not eat the poison respectively. Still, the arsenic affected him greatly, and he is wheelchair bound and seems to have dementia or some other side effect similar to it. Constance was arrested but acquitted, and Mary Cat was sent to an orphanage but reclaimed by Constance and Julian soon after. Their village, which for you city folk just means a very small town, not mud huts and log cabins necessarily, their village still talks like it was yesterday. Mary Cat is the only member of the family who leaves the house, despite her intense social anxiety and the harassment she receives when she runs errands every week. But she does it because if she didn't, then Constance would have to, and Constance would surely get worse if she ever showed her face in town again. Instead, Constance stays home when twice a week Mary Cat leaves, and they both care for their uncle, who is prone to memory loss and mood swings and has an obsession with the night of the fateful dinner. He's even writing a book about it, in fact, but that won't ever be finished. We go along with Mary Cat on one such errand run, where already we see inklings of trouble. Her one somewhat safe space in town, a coffee shop run by a woman named Stella, is ruined by a taunting pedestrian who doesn't let her leave until he's had his fill of jeering. Mary Cat's social anxiety is so bad that whenever anyone walks into the coffee shop, she usually heads out immediately, not even finishing our coffee. On the way home, she walks by a lot of children who taunt her with a rhyme about her sister poisoning her. To protect her family from these evil people, Mary Cat practices sympathetic magic, using talismans around their large property to keep the townsfolk away. Books nailed to trees and buried silver dollars hidden beneath broken steps form a salt circle of sorts around the Blackwood Manor. Mary Cat quite likes burying things and even has a small burrow in the woods on their property where she and her cat sometimes sleep. Still, despite the protective charms and the locked gates, some people wander onto the premises, usually outsiders who want to talk to the girl who got away with murder. Mary Cat assumes that it's just another one of these folk when an estranged cousin Charles begins knocking at their front door. His arrival causes a great deal of strife, and his stay with the family is a horrible thing. After a dinner with some of the people who still talk to the Blackwoods, Mary Cat begins to suspect that Constance wants to make a public reemergence, and when Charles finally comes into play, that fear only grows worse, until it consumes her so much she begins to antagonize Charles in any way she can. And she's really justified too, honestly, because Charles is the son of one of their other uncles, and he strides into the Blackwood house as if it is empty and he's repossessing it from the woods. He takes their father's things, sleeps in his room, and commands Constance as if she is his wife. Rightly so, Uncle Julian is hostile towards the newcomer and suspects Charles just wants the money that might be laying around, or rather that is laying around, for the Blackwoods cannot trust the town bankers and keep their fortune in their house. Charles berates Mary Cat any chance he gets and more or less tells her and Uncle Julian that he plans to get rid of them both. It seems he is turning Constance against her entire family too, convincing her that the way they live is unacceptable and that she's failed them both because Julian is ill and Mary Cat is, well, she's a bit odd. Tension rises until upon one of her trips to dirty Charles's room, Mary Cat pushes his pipe into the wastebasket and the newspapers inside catch on fire. The entire house is consumed in the blaze and the fire department is on the scene quickly, as well as a horde of villagers coming to watch the thing finally burn down to the ground. In their hate, the mob ransacks the already destroyed manor after the fire is out, pulling out drawers and tearing down pictures and leaving it all a mess. Uncle Julian has finally passed away in the chaos, and Mary Cat hides in her burrow in the woods with Constance and Jonas. It's here that Constance confesses that she's always known that Mary Cat was the one who poisoned their family 6 years ago. Mary Cat poisoned the sugar with arsenic arsenic because she knew that Constance wouldn't eat sugar, and Constance was the only one she cared about. Mary Cat, throughout the entire book, wishes the townsfolk were dead so she could step over their bodies. Mary Cat, who lives in her own little world with her magic charms and Jonas, who she talks to in the trees. Constance shielded her from the hate and wanted her to forget that it really wasn't the truth at all. Upon returning to the house, which has been absolutely ravaged, Mary Cat and Constance return to the hidden life they had lived before with shock-fueled normalcy. We see a reversal of roles as Constance enters the fugue-like traumatized state that Mary Cat has been in for years, and Mary Cat is forced to take Constance's role trying to care for her. The villagers, ashamed of themselves and not being accepted by the two, leave food on the charred doorstep for them silently. Charles, who left during the fire, tries to return, but now Constance sees that she can never leave the Blackwood place and turns him away. And the two live on where the Blackwood family has always lived. And We've Always Lived in the Castle, Jackson perfectly paints the intersection between social outcasting and small town life in a way that many books try and fail to capture. She allows her characters to be ugly, whether they are the victim or the victimizer, and allows them to be traumatized. It's clear that she understands the rules of rural life and how the society in such a small, tight-knit community usually works. How people talk on the porches and how kids whisper and laugh. How common rules of shop owning don't apply to folks that aren't much cared for. It's owed in part to the age of the book, written in the 60s when this type of dynamic was much more common. But that only adds to the flavor of this element because most small rural villages like this in America really haven't aged out of this attitude and way of operation. Laws have changed, norms have wavered, but in the end, small town America just has a fresh coat of modern paint. And reading this novel really reminds you of that if you grew up in a similar place. The roots of the culture are buried so deep that not much has changed, and maybe nothing ever will. Small villages are really time capsules, so far removed from larger society that they become their own places, independent of time or change. This can be both a good thing and a very bad thing. And Jackson has caught that feeling and shoved it into the pages in a way that makes the story absolutely timeless. From the cold shoulder of some villagers to the outright harassment of others to the very climax of the story where the ugliness and the hate and the distrust finally consumes all of the townsfolk and they tear the Blackwood house down. Jackson also illustrates a great portrait of different outcasts. I thought a lot of times during this book that she did what so many authors have tried to do before. For example, Uncle Julian is exactly the type of character that Stieg Larsson attempted to create in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo with whatever that old guy's name that was obsessed with his family's murder, but Larsson failed spectacularly at it and made up nothing but a slog of rambling that made my skeleton want to phase out of my skin the entire time I was forced to read it. Uncle Julian, however, is clearly an obsessive old man who lives only in the day that his life and family changed forever. He dedicates the rest of his time to it, even his physical body racked by the complications of it. It's unclear to me whether his dementia symptoms are old age or a side effect of the poisoning, but either way, it creates a very sad character that operates exactly how someone with dementia would. And Constance and Mary Cat are two very different types of caretakers to Uncle Julian. Constance tries her best to satiate both of her charges, for Julian is not the only one who needs cared for, and her entire life is dedicated to them. Constance lets them think she's being protected when really she is the one protecting them. This is even more relevant when it comes to Mary Cat because Constance takes all of the blame for poisoning the family, knowing all along that it was her sister. They're thicker than thieves, the two of them, and Mary Cat tells Constance constantly that she loves her. She regards Constance as almost a goddess, someone much better than herself who she must keep holy and pure, untouched by the townsfolk and their hatred. She doesn't want Constance ruined like she is, although Mary Cat thinks rather simply and doesn't realize all of this because everything that has happened has left her in a rather childlike state of traumatization, almost as if she is regressing somewhat to cope. She is full of anger and hate and acts out often, but also stays rather quiet and calm, living in her own world and only interacting with the outside when she must. Jonas is her beloved, the only thing other than Constance that she loves so deeply and has never been hurt by, and he lives throughout the story as another coping mechanism. She practices magic because she believes in it so strongly and wholeheartedly that it just might work, which is another thing I liked about this book. The magic is not really magic, in fact it might not work at all, but because of the way coincidences work, you never really know. Its only purpose might very well be to represent the more abstract changes in atmosphere in the story via physical means, and to communicate these changes to Mary Cat. It's firmly grounded in reality, a form of sympathetic magic that relies on belief in charging and the innate power of objects, rather than anything very mystical. Mary Cat isn't really a witch, just a child who believes in spirits and power. And in the end, the story ends in a way that Jackson often does in her stories. The way that they shouldn't end. The characters don't triumph. There's no happy ending, although it's easy enough to find happiness in how things did go. Nothing has really changed. It's the same bittersweet way the book began, except it doesn't feel like the story was pointless, the way that that other stories might when this is how they end. The characters have not grown, but they have experienced and lived, and you know they have, because Jackson took you with them on their respective stories. And most of all, the story itself served a purpose in the end. Nothing except the world around them feels stagnant, because the world around them was never really part of the story to begin with. The only bits of that world that we do care about is the village that others them. And this story deals with the concept of othering very well in a way that made me really sad and felt like a terrible sort of home to me. It captured the hate you feel and the invisibility yet vulnerability, the hypocrisy of all the feelings that come with it, and the way different people deal with being on the short end of the stick, as well as the guilt and shame of having been in the wrong, the measly attempts to make peace with the people you've tormented. Not only that, it's almost a love letter to anyone with social anxiety, depicting two women falling victim to their own agoraphobia and ultimately giving into it, because the world only continues to prove their internal biases are correct. It's definitely not a story to take any lessons from in that regard, but there's comfort in knowing that the experience you feel that you are having is being felt by somebody else. Overall, I love this novel, if you couldn't tell. Shirley Jackson is one of my favorite authors, and penned another one of my favorites, The Haunting of Hill House, which is very similar to this novel in thematics and main character, but still distinctly different. Jackson wrote much from her own feelings and experiences in this one, and that vulnerability pays off in narratives that are wholly touching and raw. She writes the darkest parts of depression with a whimsy that no one else could ever pull off without feeling weird, with language that is flowery and pretty and magical in a way that perfectly coincides with the disturbing and upsetting subject matter. Something I think about often is the phrase commanding language, and I think that Jackson commands words rather than writing them. I love the off-kilter main characters whose voices are so distinctive and present, to the point where even those that aren't in the main POV are still uniquely themselves. Even on technical levels, the book is good, with decent pacing and a captivating narrative and characters that don't grow but do regress. And of course, this novel hits close to home, so I'm apt to enjoy and understand it. Shirley Jackson's writing is really home to me in the worst ways, and I love it. And this one might take the cake with the addition of the beloved pet cat. Her books are dreary and dull, and yet full of so much life and color. It's certainly not going to be the most upsetting or disturbing thing you've ever read. In fact, it's not really anything except for sad, but it's still a really good read and sparks a lot of thought if you grew up in a rural community. Let me know what you thought of this book if you've read it in the comments. I saw a review of this book before I even read it, and it was wildly different than my own interpretation and thoughts, so I'm interested to see what you guys think. There's a lot you could read out of this one, even though it's pretty short at like 200 pages. I had a rough start this week, so hopefully I get this video out on time. I mean, if you're seeing it on Friday, then I did, but let me complain. This is my castle and you're all just throwing chairs at the window.